The small village of Blackwater was quiet, perched at the edge of an ancient forest that stretched for miles, its trees twisting together in dense, shadowy tangles. It was a place that had always seemed to be trapped between time, where the modern world met the old and decayed. A place that, to outsiders, felt almost too still, as though it were holding its breath. This was how Emma Taylor found herself there, a young journalist from the city with a thirst for the unexplained. She had heard rumors of Blackwater's oddities, whispers about the people, the land, and the mysterious Blackwater house, which loomed like a shadow at the edge of the village. Everyone in town spoke of it, though no one dared approach. Blackwater House had been abandoned for years. Some said it was haunted, some said it was cursed. Others claimed it was the site of strange rituals performed by the old family who had lived there, a family that had mysteriously vanished nearly a century ago. Whatever the case, no one had set foot inside for as long as anyone could remember. Emma had never been one to put stock in ghost stories or rumors, but there was something about Blackwater House that intrigued her. The house seemed to call to her, its isolation speaking to her journalist's instincts. She had been sent to investigate strange occurrences at abandoned places before, and each time, she had uncovered little more than folklore and superstition. But she sensed that Blackwater House was different. As Emma made her way through the village, the streets narrowed and the buildings grew older. The village felt as if it were caught in a different era, the cobblestone roads uneven beneath her feet. The village square was empty, save for an elderly man who sat on a bench, his weathered face turned toward the sky. His eyes followed Emma as she passed, but he did not speak. At the far end of the square, an iron gate stood open, leading down a narrow, overgrown path toward the forest. Through the tangled trees, Emma could see the silhouette of Blackwater House, its dark outline barely visible against the dimming sky. The house was enormous, 4 stories high, with wide windows that seemed to stare blankly out over the land. Its stone facade was crumbling, and the ivy that crawled up the walls made it look like a living thing. Emma's breath caught as she stood before it, the air growing heavier around her, thick with the scent of damp earth and decaying wood. The door to Blackwater House stood slightly ajar. It wasn't locked. Emma hesitated for a moment, feeling an unsettling chill run down her spine. But her curiosity won out, and she stepped inside. The air was cool and stagnant, the smell of mildew and rot greeting her as she crossed the threshold. The grand entryway stretched before her, with a sweeping staircase curving upwards, its banister dark and slick with age. The walls were lined with portraits, long-forgotten ancestors of the family who had once lived here. Their eyes seemed to follow Emma as she moved deeper into the house, the silence of the place settling like a weight on her chest. Emma had expected dust, webs, and the scent of abandonment. But there was something else, something alive in the air. A presence. She couldn't explain it, but it felt as though the house itself was waiting, watching her. "Hello," she called, her voice echoing through the vast emptiness. No answer. The floor creaked underfoot as she moved through the hall, passing doors that had been left ajar, their contents hidden in shadow. The walls were lined with faded wallpaper, the patterns barely visible through layers of dirt and grime. The whole place felt stuck, like it hadn't seen the light of day in a century. As Emma explored, her flashlight flickering in the gloom, she began to notice something odd. There were no signs of typical decay. The house, though old and abandoned, didn't feel like it had been left alone for decades. There were no cobwebs, no broken windows, no rusting metal or rotting wood. It was as though the house had been carefully preserved. But why? She found a door at the far end of the hallway, its brass handle tarnished but intact. As she turned the handle and stepped inside, the temperature seemed to drop and a heavy pressure filled the room. This was different from the rest of the house. The air here was thick, almost suffocating. The room itself was large, filled with old, wooden furniture, but the most striking thing was the grand mirror that hung on the far wall. It was ornate, with intricate carvings running around the frame, but the glass was dark, almost as if it had been intentionally clouded. Emma moved closer to the mirror, drawn to it inexplicably. She reached out and wiped a patch of the glass clear with her sleeve. For a moment, she only saw her own reflection, a young woman, with brown hair and eyes wide with curiosity. But then, as she stared into the glass, something began to change. The reflection shifted. At first, it was subtle, a shadow crossing her own face, a flicker of movement in the corner of the room. But then the reflection grew more distinct. In the glass, Emma saw a figure, tall, draped in a long black cloak, its face hidden by a hood. The figure moved behind her in the mirror, though when Emma spun around, the room was empty. Her heart began to race. It's just a trick of the light, she told herself. But her instinct screamed at her to leave. Before she could turn away, the figure in the mirror raised a hand, pointing directly at her. Emma's breath caught in her throat, her heart pounding wildly. The figure's fingers seemed to stretch impossibly long, its skeletal form looming over her. Suddenly, the mirror flashed with a blinding light. Emma screamed, stumbling backward, but the reflection didn't fade, it grew. The figure stepped out of the glass, its movements unnaturally smooth, like it was no longer confined by the rules of reality. The room was now cold. The walls seemed to close in around her. The air turned to ice, and Emma could hear a whispering, low and distorted, coming from every direction. "You shouldn't have come here." The voice was sharp, ancient, and full of malice. The figure loomed over her, its dark form stretching unnaturally tall, casting a long shadow across the floor. Emma could feel its presence now, a terrible weight pressing against her chest. "Leave this place, or you will join us." The reflection in the mirror was now real. The figure was standing right behind her, its face obscured by a shadowy hood. Emma's breath hitched as she tried to move, but her body felt paralyzed. With a scream, she forced herself to break free of the paralysis, running toward the door, her footsteps echoing in the hallway. But the house seemed to shift, its layout twisting and warping, the halls stretching further than they should. The door at the end of the hall, the one she had come through, was now miles away. Panic surged as she tried to find an exit, but the house seemed endless. The walls closed in, and the whispers grew louder, more insistent, like 1,000 voices calling to her from within the wood and stone. "Join us. Stay with us." Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Emma stumbled into a room with a wide, stained glass window. She could see the village below, the forest beyond, but the figure was still with her. It stood in the doorway, its presence an immovable weight. But before she could make another move, a sudden crash from the other side of the house echoed through the air. The floor beneath her feet trembled. The figure in the doorway turned. For a moment, Emma could hear a distant, agonized scream, a cry that seemed to stretch beyond the walls of the house. The house was alive. The shadows in the room shifted, gathering together in the center, forming into a massive, writhing shape. The thing that emerged was not human. It was a twisted amalgamation of darkness, something born from the very walls of Blackwater House. It was ancient, and it was hungry. Emma turned and fled, running through the labyrinth of hallways. Her breath was ragged, her chest heaving, but the house itself seemed to fight her every step, the corridors elongating and twisting, pushing her toward an inevitable fate. And then she reached the front door. It was open. The mist outside had thickened, but Emma didn't care. She ran into the darkness, the air feeling fresher than it had in hours. She never looked back, but as the door slammed shut behind her, the whispers of Blackwater House still echoed in her ears. and somewhere in the distance, the last remnants of a shadow watched. The air had been thick with fog for days. It wasn't the kind of mist that could be chased away by sunlight or wind. It was something unnatural. The kind of fog that lingered, thick as sorrow, pressing in on the land like a funeral shroud. It crept over Blackwood Hill, curling around trees and houses, swallowing the world whole in its suffocating grip. Lucinda had grown up in the shadow of the hill, in a small cottage at the edge of Blackwood Forest. She had always felt the weight of its presence, the trees too close, the shadows too dark, but it was the fog that seemed to awaken something in her. The hill was ancient, older than the town itself, and had long been a place of superstition. Whispers of a curse had clung to the place for generations, but they were only stories, tales to frighten children on stormy nights. At least, that's what Lucinda had always believed. Lucinda sat by the window, watching as the fog thickened, swallowing the dirt road in front of her home. The world outside had gone eerily still. No birds sang, no breeze stirred the leaves. Only the quiet, ever-present murmur of the fog as it curled through the trees. She shivered and pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders. The house was cold, the kind of cold that seeped into your bones, even when the fire was crackling in the hearth. She glanced down at the table, where a candle burned low, casting flickering shadows on the walls. Lucinda, her father had said earlier, his voice rough from too many years of hard work, you stay inside tonight. It's not safe out there. He was a man of few words, but when he spoke with that kind of urgency, Lucinda listened. She'd noticed a change in him over the past week, an unease that he tried to hide behind his gruff demeanor. It wasn't just the fog that had him on edge. It was something else, something that gnawed at him in the dark. Lucinda hadn't pressed him. Not yet. But tonight, as she stared out the window into the endless gray, something in her gut told her that the stories of Blackwood Hill were more than just stories. There was something wrong with that place, something old and dangerous. The wind picked up, rattling the shutters, and Lucinda jumped, heart pounding. It wasn't a gust of wind that made the noise. It was a knock, a loud, persistent knocking at the door. Her pulse quickened. She hesitated, but then her feet were moving, drawn to the door as if it were an inevitability. She didn't know why she was so certain someone was out there, but the feeling of dread in her chest was unbearable. When she opened the door, she found no one standing there, just the empty, fog-filled road stretching ahead. Her breath caught in her throat. There, at the edge of the fog, something shifted, a dark figure. It was too far to make out any details, but Lucinda could feel the eyes of whatever it was on her, a cold weight pressing on her chest. She slammed the door shut and locked it. The feeling of being watched did not dissipate, though. It only grew stronger, and as the minutes ticked by, her unease turned to fear. The knock, the figure in the fog, it wasn't a coincidence. Something was waiting. Lucinda moved quickly through the house, drawing the curtains tight and securing every lock. But even with every door bolted, she couldn't shake the feeling that someone, was standing just outside, watching, waiting. She froze as a sound reached her ears, a soft, wet scraping, like nails dragging against the wooden floor. It came from upstairs. She didn't want to go up there. Her legs trembled, her heart hammering in her chest as she slowly ascended the staircase. The sound was unmistakable now, steady, relentless. Something was moving. At the top of the stairs, the house grew even colder. The walls groaned, as if the house itself were shuddering in fear. She turned toward her father's study, the only room with a door that remained shut during the day. The sound seemed to come from inside. Lucinda's hand hovered over the knob. her skin tingling with the sensation that if she opened the door, she would never be the same again. Her breath quickened, and with a shaky exhale, she twisted the handle. The door creaked open. Inside, the room was dark. Not just dim, but unnaturally so. The air was thick, heavy with the scent of damp earth and something else, something metallic, like blood. Her father was sitting at his desk, but his posture was wrong. His body was stiff, unnaturally so, as though he were frozen in place. His eyes were wide and unblinking, staring at nothing, a thin line of blood running down his forehead, dripping onto the papers in front of him. Lucinda's heart dropped into her stomach as she stepped inside. She reached for him, but the moment her fingers brushed his shoulder, his head snapped to the side with a sickening crack. His eyes were empty. Hello. Behind him, on the desk, was a book, ancient and weathered, its pages yellowed with age. The title, written in faded letters, was The Hollow of Blackwood Hill. Lucinda staggered back, her breath coming in panicked gasps. She backed out of the room and slammed the door behind her. The sound of her father's body shifting in the dark echoed in the hallway. Her mind raced, trying to piece together what had just happened. But there was no time to think. There was only the instinct to run. She turned and fled downstairs, but as she reached the bottom, something caught her eye through the window. The figure in the fob was back. It was closer now, standing just outside the garden gate. It was tall, too tall, and its silhouette was blurred, as if the fog clung to it like a shroud. Lucinda's breath caught in her throat as the figure took a step forward, and then another. In the distance, she could hear the faint sound of a bell tolling. It was too much. She had to leave, but when she turned to grab her coat, she froze. Her father's voice, weak and strangled, came from upstairs. Lucinda. She could barely bring herself to move, but the sound of her name, spoken in that voice, was enough to drag her toward the stairs again. Lucinda's heart pounded in her ears as she made her way back up the stairs, each step creaking underfoot as if the house itself were protesting her movements. Her father's voice echoed in her mind, pulling her toward the study, but the closer she got, the colder the air became. She could feel it now, a presence that hung in the dark like a weight. Not her father, not any longer. At the top of the stairs, she hesitated, her hand on the banister, staring at the door to the study. She could hear him still, soft, wheezing breaths that didn't sound human. That didn't sound alive. No, this isn't him. This isn't my father. But she couldn't stop herself. She was already moving again, compelled by a force she couldn't name. Her fingers trembled as she reached for the door handle, the cold metal biting into her skin. The room beyond was dark, darker than before, but Lucinda stepped inside anyway. The faint glow of the candle from earlier had died, leaving only shadows and the faint smell of decay. She squinted, her eyes slowly adjusting to the dimness. There was no sound now, just the oppressive weight of silence. And then she heard it, a scraping, like nails on stone, coming from behind the desk. Lucinda's breath caught in her throat. Slowly, cautiously, she rounded the desk, her legs trembling beneath her. Her father's body was still in the same position, as though it had never moved. His head was tilted awkwardly to one side, blood still seeping from the gash on his forehead. But something was wrong with his eyes. They weren't just empty, they were black. Black as the void, with no trace of humanity left in them. He's gone. Lucinda's heart stopped for a moment. She wanted to look away, to run, but her feet were rooted to the spot. Then she saw it, a sliver of movement from the corner of her eye. A figure emerged from the shadows. It wasn't a man, not fully. It was tall, unnaturally tall, and its form seemed to flicker in the dim light, as if it were made of smoke or shadows. It had no discernible face, only a featureless void where its head should have been. Its arms stretched out unnaturally long, fingers curled like claws, scraping against the floor in a grotesque, rhythmic motion. Lucinda stumbled back, her mind reeling. This wasn't real. This couldn't be real, but the thing in front of her was all too real. Her father's body jerked as if in response to the figure's presence, a low, unnatural groan escaping from its throat. The thing reached down with a slow, deliberate motion, as though savoring her fear, its claws hovering over her father's still form. Then it turned toward Lucinda, and she felt the weight of its gaze even though it had no eyes. The cold in the room grew even more intense, and the air thickened, making it harder to breathe. Lucinda's chest tightened, her head spinning. She took a step back, then another, until her heel struck something solid. She whipped around to find the book on the desk, the hollow of Blackwood Hill, still lying open. Its pages were worn, nearly falling apart at the edges, but it beckoned her, strangely familiar, and yet utterly foreign. The symbols on the pages were strange, like an ancient language, twisted and gnarled, resembling neither writing nor drawing. Her hand reached for it before she could stop herself. As soon as her fingers brushed the cover, the temperature in the room plummeted. Lucinda's skin prickled as if 1,000 invisible eyes were watching her. And then, in the silence, the air began to hum, low and deep, like the sound of the earth itself groaning. The thing, the shadow, made a sound now too, a rasping, whispering noise that slid into her thoughts, a voice without a mouth. You shouldn't have opened it. The voice was inside her head, a sibilant hiss that froze her blood. Her eyes widened, but she couldn't look away. She clutched the book tighter, a cold dread crawling up her spine. It was the book, The Curse of Blackwood Hill, the source of everything. The thing stepped closer, its long, clawed hands moving with unnatural precision. Lucinda's heart pounded in her chest, and she knew, without a doubt, that it was coming for her. In a desperate instinct, she hurled the book across the room. It struck the far wall with a sickening thud, and the world seemed to stop. The thing faltered, its clawed hand hovering midair, then lowered slowly. The humming sound died away, replaced by an unnatural silence that filled the room. The temperature seemed to rise, but not in a comforting way. Instead, it was stifling, suffocating. Lucinda turned to run. As she reached the door, a heavy hand gripped her arm. Her scream caught in her throat as she felt the chill of death, the cold, rotting touch of whatever was left of her father's spirit. His voice rasped in her ear, his breath foul and rancid. "Don't leave me, Lucinda." She twisted her arm, pulling away with every ounce of strength she had. But his grip was unyielding, his fingers like iron. "Let me go," she shouted, her voice breaking as she fought to free herself. But the harder she pulled, the tighter his grip became, and then the door slammed shut. Her breath caught as she stared into the dark, the silence pressing in on all sides. Behind her, her father's body remained motionless, but the thing, the shadow, had vanished. Her heart pounded in her chest. She was trapped in the study. The book had been the key, but to what? Was it a gateway? A seal? Or something worse? Lucinda backed away from the desk, her eyes wild with panic. She couldn't stay here. She had to get out. But she could feel the presence of the shadow everywhere. It was in the air, in the walls, in the very house itself. Suddenly, the faintest sound broke the silence. Soft footsteps from above. Someone, or something, was coming down the stairs. Lucinda's blood ran cold. She wasn't alone anymore. Lucinda's breath hitched as she listened. The soft, deliberate footsteps grew louder, echoing in the thick silence of the house. They were unmistakable, slow and measured, almost like someone was savoring each step. The kind of footsteps that made the hairs on the back of her neck stand up, every instinct in her screaming to run. But where could she run? The house was a maze of narrow hallways and closed rooms, each one more oppressive than the last. The door to the study was shut, the windows locked. The fog outside pressed against the glass like a living thing, a suffocating barrier. She was trapped. The footsteps continued, each one drawing nearer. They weren't human. The sound was too uneven, too wrong. A shuffle, a drag, like something or someone was limping, or worse, dragging something behind them. Lucinda backed toward the desk, her eyes scanning the room frantically. Her mind raced, trying to find a way out, but the thought of facing whatever was coming up the stairs made her stomach churn. And then she heard it. A voice. Soft, faint, but unmistakable. Lucinda. It was her father's voice. But it wasn't right. The words sounded hollow, distant, as if they were being spoken from a deep, echoing well. She froze, her blood turning to ice in her veins. The footsteps reached the bottom of the stairs, and the silence returned. Lucinda held her breath, every muscle in her body tensed, but she dared not move. And then the door to the study creaked open. Her father's body was still slumped at the desk, his black eyes unblinking. The shadow, the thing, was gone, but something had changed in the room. The air was thick with an unnatural energy, as though the very walls were alive with it, pulsing like the beat of a heart. Lucinda's mind raced. She had to get out. She had to leave before. A shadow flickered in the doorway. At first, it was just a movement at the edge of her vision, like a ripple in the air. But then it stepped forward. It wasn't human. It was a figure wrapped in darkness, taller than any man, its form wraith-like, flickering in and out of focus. It moved like smoke, its edges constantly shifting, never fully solid. And in the depths of its form, Lucinda could almost make out a face. A grotesque, misshapen face. Eyes like black holes, a mouth stretched into a jagged grin. The shadow did not speak. It didn't need to. Lucinda could feel it in the air, the hunger. Lucinda. It was her father's voice again. Only now it was rasping, broken, filled with a terrible urgency. The figure in the doorway extended a long, spindly arm, reaching toward her. Without thinking, Lucinda bolted. Her feet slammed into the floor as she tore through the room, toward the door. She didn't look back. She couldn't. The thing's hand closed around her wrist before she even reached the threshold. The force of it yanked her back into the study. The air in her lungs squeezed out in a desperate gasp. She stumbled, caught off balance, and fell hard onto the floor. Her chest heaved as she scrambled to get up, but before she could even make it to her feet, the shadow was there, towering over her. She could feel its cold breath, or what passed for breath, pressing against her skin, the stench of decay so powerful it made her gag. You cannot escape. The words weren't spoken, they were felt. They slid into her mind like poison, curling around her thoughts, making her head spin. Her vision blurred. She could barely think straight. The thing leaned closer, its presence overwhelming. Lucinda could barely move, her body frozen in terror. Her eyes darted around the room, searching for anything that could help. And then her gaze fell on the book. The book, The Hollow of Blackwood Hill, the ancient, weathered book that had begun all of this. The shadows around her seemed to stretch toward it, like the thing in front of her was drawn to it. The book was the key. Lucinda reached for it, her hand shaking violently. The instant her fingers brushed the cover, the room seemed to tilt, the air warping around her. The shadows writhed and snapped, like creatures disturbed from slumber. The figure recoiled, letting out a low, guttural growl that vibrated through the walls. Lucinda didn't understand what was happening, why it was happening, but her hands moved without hesitation. She opened the book. The pages fluttered, as if stirred by an invisible wind, and then settled on a single page. The Hollow of Blackwood Hill. The words on the page shifted, rearranging themselves, the ink flowing and changing as if alive. Lucinda stared, her mind struggling to keep up with the chaos unfolding around her. The words twisted into symbols she couldn't comprehend, symbols that made her skin crawl. But one word stood out. Awaken. A violent tremor ran through the house. The floor beneath her feet cracked, the walls groaning as if something below the earth was stirring. The shadow in front of her screeched, the sound almost unbearable. It was like nails on stone, like 1,000 voices screaming in agony. Lucinda's body trembled as she tried to make sense of the page, but the words were shifting too quickly. She didn't know what they meant. She didn't know what to do. And then, as if by instinct, her fingers traced one of the symbols, a jagged line that spiraled into itself. A sudden crack shattered the air, and the ground beneath Lucinda's feet split open, a blinding light pouring from the crack. She screamed as the house shook violently, the walls buckling, the air thickening with a heavy, choking presence. The shadow lunged toward her, its claws snapping, but the light from the book expanded, pushing the thing back. It screeched in fury, its form flickering as it fought against the light. But Lucinda couldn't move. The pressure in her chest was unbearable. She felt like she was suffocating, like the very air was fighting her. She turned her eyes back to the book, the symbols now glowing with an otherworldly light. It was calling her. She could feel the power of it, pulling at her. And then the house stopped. Everything fell silent. The air, thick with energy moments before, now felt strangely still. The crack in the floor closed. The light from the book dimmed. And the shadow, the thing that had haunted her, that had taken her father, was gone. Lucinda was left alone in the dark, the book still glowing faintly in her hands. But she knew it wasn't over. The silence that descended on the room was deafening. Lucinda's breath came in shallow, jagged gasps as she clutched the book to her chest, the pages warm beneath her fingertips. Her heart was racing, her thoughts a chaotic mess. She had no idea what had just happened or what she had unleashed, but she knew one thing for sure. The shadow was not gone. It had retreated, temporarily, perhaps, but its hunger was far from satisfied. She rose slowly to her feet, her legs weak, as though the air itself had drained her strength. The room was unnervingly still. The oppressive weight of the house seemed to lift for a moment, but something deeper, darker, remained. The book. Lucinda felt its pull again. It was as if the very house itself was waiting, breathing in time with her heartbeat. The power from the pages was alive, calling to her, a force that thrummed in her veins. The fear that had gnawed at her throat began to shift into something else, curiosity. What is this? What have I done? As if in answer, the floor creaked behind her. Lucinda spun around, eyes wild, her heart slamming against her ribs. But there was no figure, no shadow. The room was empty. Yet, she wasn't alone. She could feel it. Something was watching her. Her gaze flicked to the fireplace, cold now, the fire long since extinguished. The faint glow from the book cast eerie shadows across the walls. The symbols in the pages had stopped shifting, but the dark energy still hung in the air, like a storm about to break. Then, a voice, a whisper, slithered through her mind. You opened it. You woke it. You are the key. Lucinda's breath faltered. The words were not spoken aloud. They were inside her head, like a thought that wasn't hers. She dropped the book, but it floated in midair, as if suspended by an invisible force. The room seemed to bend with the weight of it, the walls groaning, the shadows stretching toward the floating pages. The whisper returned, more insistent now, crawling deeper into her thoughts. There is no escaping what you have summoned. You are bound to it, bound to us. Lucinda staggered back, her head spinning, the world around her blurred. She couldn't breathe. The oppressive weight of the shadow that had once only haunted the hill, the thing that had claimed her father, had now tethered itself to her very soul. The curse had never been meant to be broken. It had merely been passed on. Her body trembled with the realization. She had opened the door. Who are you? Lucinda gasped, her voice barely a whisper. She was barely holding on, the weight of the knowledge pressing against her chest. We are the Hollow, the voice answered. We were born of Blackwood Hill. We are its guardians and its prisoners. And now, so are you. The walls of the house shook again, but this time it wasn't just the house. It was the ground beneath them. The very earth itself groaned in protest. Lucinda could hear it, a distant, awful rumble from below. a low growl, like something stirring from a long, terrible sleep. The hollow, it wasn't just a curse, it was a prison. Lucinda's mind raced as the weight of the truth sank in. The thing that had claimed her father, the thing that had haunted Blackwood Hill, wasn't just a shadow. It was a being, an ancient, dark force that had been bound to the hill, to the land, to the book. And when she opened it, she had not only unleashed it, she had become its next prisoner. She turned toward the door, her legs shaking as she forced herself to move. There had to be a way out. There had to be a way to end this. No. The voice was louder now, sharper. There is no escape. There is only the hollow. The house began to twist, the walls warping as if the very fabric of reality was being unraveled. The light from the book intensified, glowing brighter until it was nearly blinding, illuminating the dark corners of the room. The shadows moved, flickering and shifting as if alive. You have awoken us. You are ours now. Lucinda felt it then, a sharp, ripping pain in her chest, as if something was being torn from within her. She screamed, but no sound came out. The force was pulling her toward the book, toward the darkness that hovered at the edges of her vision. You cannot undo what has been done, the voice echoed. The hollow will consume you. The floor cracked open again, wider this time, and from the gaping chasm came a darkness deeper than night itself. It reached toward her with tendrils that twisted and coiled, pulling her closer to the abyss. Desperation surged through Lucinda. There was only one thing left to try. She threw herself toward the book, her hands seizing the pages. And this time, instead of trying to close it, she tore them. She ripped through the symbols, the ancient words, her fingers bleeding, but she didn't care. The moment the first page tore, the air shifted. The darkness recoiled. She tore another page. No, stop. The voice screeched in fury, but Lucinda was beyond reason. She could hear the growls of something ancient, something malevolent, but she didn't stop. The room was crumbling now. The walls, the floor, the very house was being torn apart by the energy she had unleashed. The shadow was fading, recoiling into nothingness as the last page was shredded. No, the voice wailed, now just a whisper, a distant cry lost in the wind. You were supposed to be the one. The chasm beneath her feet closed with a final thunderous crash. Then, nothing. Silence. Lucinda was kneeling on the floor, her hands clutching shredded pages. The light from the book was gone, and with it, the oppressive weight that had clung to the house. The room was still. The fog outside had lifted, and for the first time in days, the air was clear. But the weight of what she had just done, a final act of defiance, of destruction, weighed heavily on her. The hollow was no more. For now, Lucinda stood, her body trembling, her mind racing to process the events that had unfolded. The darkness had been banished, but she knew that she had only torn a single page of a much darker story. The hollow might have been destroyed, but the land of Blackwood Hill, the curse of it, was far from over. The house, though damaged, stood silent and still in the aftermath. As Lucinda walked to the door, she glanced back at the ruins of the study. Her father's body was gone, along with the shadow that had claimed him. The house felt different now, hollow, like it had been purged of its ghost, but at a great cost. She stepped outside into the cold night, the fog still lingering at the edges of the hill, waiting for her. The hollow of Blackwood Hill was gone, but the curse would never leave. The small town of Ashford Hollow was tucked away in a forgotten corner of the country, a place where the land seemed to swallow all evidence of the world beyond. Surrounded by thick woods and steep hills, the town looked like it had been frozen in time. The streets were narrow, the houses old, their frames leaning slightly as if the weight of history had pressed too heavily upon them. The very air here seemed different, damp, dense, and filled with an almost oppressive stillness. The kind of stillness that made people feel as if they were being watched. It was a place where old things went to die, and no one ever questioned how or why. It was here, on the outskirts of town, that Lily Bennett arrived, weary from the long drive, but filled with a sense of foreboding she couldn't quite shake. She had never seen Ashford Hollow before, but something had called her here. It had been weeks since her grandmother's passing, and in her will, Lily had inherited the old family estate, a decaying mansion at the edge of the woods. Lily's grandmother, Margaret Bennett, had been a reclusive woman, rarely seen in town. She had lived alone in that mansion for as long as Lily could remember. The townsfolk didn't speak much about her. They merely looked away when her name was mentioned, as though they all shared some unspoken knowledge about the place, about Margaret, that was too terrible to say aloud. But Lily had no choice but to come. Her grandmother's will was clear. She must move into the house, live there for a year, and only then could she sell it. The town's real estate market was poor, and no one wanted the mansion. But to Lily, it was more than a burden. It was a mystery. She needed answers. The mansion itself stood like a dark sentinel at the edge of the forest. Its towering frame was jagged and intimidating, its once pristine windows now cracked and dirty. Ivy and moss clung to the stone walls, winding in and out of the cracks, almost as if the house were trying to return to the earth, to become one with the land that had birthed it. Lily stepped out of her car, feeling the weight of the place settle upon her shoulders like a heavy cloak. The front door groaned on its hinges when she pushed it open, revealing the grand, yet decaying, interior. Dust filled the air, and the smell of mildew and old wood seemed to saturate the very walls. The house was silent, too silent. "Grandmother," Lily whispered, though she knew the old woman was long gone. There was no one to hear her, but the words seemed to hang in the air, waiting for something. Lily took a deep breath, stepping further into the house, the sound of her footsteps echoing eerily through the empty halls. The interior was just as old and dilapidated as the exterior. Wooden floors that creaked with every step, faded wallpaper peeling from the walls, and the faint outline of portraits that had once graced the walls now covered by shadows. Her grandmother had been a woman of wealth, but time had eroded everything that had once made this mansion grand. She ran her hand over the banister of the staircase, her fingers brushing over the smooth, polished wood. It was the only thing in the house that seemed to have withstood the ravages of time. As she reached the top of the stairs, Lily heard something, faint, almost imperceptible, like a distant whisper. She froze. The air around her shifted, growing colder. It wasn't her imagination. The whisper came again, louder this time. Lily. Her name. Lily spun around, her heart hammering in her chest, but the hallway behind her was empty. No one was there. She swallowed hard, trying to push down the panic that was rising in her throat. It must be the house settling, or the wind. She tried to reason with herself, but deep down, a seed of dread had already been planted. She turned back toward the hallway, her mind racing, but there was no denying what she had heard. The whispering had stopped, but something else lingered, an oppressive feeling, like the walls themselves were closing in around her. She could feel eyes on her, though she was alone. "Get a grip, Lily," she whispered to herself, forcing her legs to move forward. "It's just an old house. You're not a child anymore." She made her way to the first room on the left, which appeared to be the library. The door creaked as she opened it, revealing a room filled with shelves that stretched from floor to ceiling. Books of all shapes and sizes filled the shelves, some old, some newer, though most were covered in dust. Lily walked deeper into the room, glancing over the spines of the books. Her grandmother had been a lover of history, old, forgotten histories, the kind that the rest of the world had left behind. There were books on ancient rituals, strange myths, and the occult, topics Lily had never understood or cared to explore. But now, they seemed to call to her, beckoning her to open them. Something caught her eye, a book that was slightly different from the others. Its cover was black, the pages worn and brittle. She pulled it from the shelf, wiping away the dust as she opened it to the first page. The words were written in a language she didn't recognize. Strange symbols, like runes, filled the page, swirling in patterns that almost seemed to move. At the bottom of the page, in a shaky, almost illegible script, were the words, "The Hollow calls, and all who answer are bound." Before Lily could process what she was reading, a cold gust of wind swept through the room, extinguishing the light from the fireplace. The temperature dropped, and Lily felt a chill creeping into her bones. The whispering came again, louder now, rising from the very walls. "Lily." The book slipped from her hands and crashed to the floor with a dull thud. She stared at it for a moment, but before she could move, someone grabbed her shoulder. She spun around, but no one was there. The room was now freezing cold, the shadows thickening in the corners. Lily could hear something moving, shifting in the darkness, as though it was crawling toward her. Panic surged through her. She ran for the door, but the handle wouldn't turn. She twisted and yanked, but it was locked from the other side. "Lily," the voice whispered again, louder this time, almost in her ear. A cold hand touched the back of her neck. She screamed, whirling around. Nothing, just darkness. A suffocating, crawling darkness that seemed to rise from the floor itself, filling the room with an insidious weight. The walls groaned, as though the house itself were waking. And then, the whispers came again, louder and more insistent. "Lily, you cannot leave." The walls trembled, and Lily felt a pressure against her chest, as if something was pushing her into the room. The book on the floor had opened, its pages now glowing faintly in the dark, the strange symbols twisting and turning as though alive. "You are bound, child. The Hollow has claimed you." Lily backed away, her mind spinning. The book, the words, her grandmother's mysterious life, the mansion, the Hollow, something ancient, something dark, had taken root here long ago, and it had been waiting for her, waiting for someone to come, someone who would open the doors that had been shut for so long. And now that she had answered its call, it would not let her go. Her heart pounded in her chest as she backed into the far corner of the library. The whispers were deafening now, and the shadows seemed to close in on her from all sides. She had no choice. She had to escape, but as she turned to flee, the door burst open on its own, and standing in the doorway was a figure, a tall, thin shape dressed in tattered black robes, its face obscured by a hood. It didn't speak, but the voice inside her head answered her question before she could ask. "The Hollow never lets go." Lily tried to run, but the figure moved with unnatural speed, grabbing her by the wrist and pulling her back toward the book. "You are mine now," the figure whispered, and Lily felt her strength draining away, her body growing weaker by the second. And then, in a final desperate act, she reached for the book once more, her fingers trembling. As she touched its pages, everything stopped. The house, the walls, the shadows fell silent. The whispering ceased, and for a brief moment, Lily felt a calmness wash over her, a feeling that was both terrifying and comforting. "You are bound to the Hollow, Lily, and you always will be." Her world went black. To be continued. I hope you enjoyed the beginning of this eerie tale. There's a lot more to uncover in Ashford Hollow, and the story is still unfolding. What do you think so far? Would you like to continue exploring the mystery, or should I adjust the direction? Lily awoke to an unbearable silence. Her eyes flickered open, but everything was blurry at first. The shadows of the room shifted like liquid smoke, and the air was heavy with the musty scent of old wood and damp earth. She tried to move, but her limbs felt as if they were made of stone, cold, rigid, and unyielding. When her vision cleared, she saw that she was no longer in the library. The room was unfamiliar, a dark, cavernous space with jagged stone walls that seemed to pulse with an eerie energy. The temperature was even colder than before, the air thick with a damp, suffocating chill. It felt like she was deep underground. Lily's pulse quickened as she struggled to sit up. Her wrists were bound to an ancient-looking stone chair, the ropes thick and tight, digging into her skin. She winced, trying to move, but her body felt weak, drained of all energy, as though something had been siphoning her strength. The room itself seemed alive with malevolent energy. The walls were etched with symbols, strange, arcane runes that pulsed with a faint, sickly glow. The floor was uneven, made of cracked stone slabs, and in the far corner, there was a low, flickering fire burning in a stone pit, casting long, distorted shadows. A low hum filled the air, almost like a chant, but the words were unintelligible. It wasn't a sound you could hear with your ears. It was more like something inside you, vibrating your very bones. The whispering returned, but this time, it wasn't just one voice. It was dozens, hundreds of voices, all speaking in a chaotic, dissonant chorus. The words were twisted, broken fragments of speech, like the remnants of forgotten prayers. "You are ours now, Lily." She shuddered, the hairs on the back of her neck standing on end. "The Hollow calls to you. It will never let you go." Lily's heart raced. The figure, the tall, hooded figure she had seen at the door, had it brought her here? Was she still in the mansion? The Hollow? The name echoed in her mind like a hammer against glass. What was the Hollow? She couldn't remember how long she had been unconscious, but she knew she had to get out. She couldn't stay here, wherever here was. She strained against the ropes, but they held tight. She could feel the weight of something watching her, a presence in the darkness. The walls seemed to breathe in time with her pulse, and the shadows in the corners of the room shifted again, coiling like serpents. And then a figure stepped out of the shadows. It was the same tall figure from before, but now its face was visible, or what passed for a face. Its skin was ashen, stretched thin over its skull, and its eyes that were not eyes, were black as night, absorbing the light around it. Its mouth was wide, too wide, its lips drawn back in an unnatural grin that sent a cold wave of terror through Lily's chest. It was no longer just a person. It was something else, something wrong. "You are bound to us." The figure spoke, its voice deep and guttural, reverberating through the air like a low growl. The sound was inside her head again, louder now, as if the words were coming from the very walls themselves. "You will never leave. The Hollow has claimed you." Lily's throat went dry, and her pulse thundered in her ears. She fought against the ropes again, her fingers digging into the thick, rough fibers, but it was useless. Her strength had failed her. The figure stepped closer, and the temperature in the room dropped even further. Lily could see her breath misting in the cold air, but it wasn't the cold she feared. It was the thing standing before her, the thing that had been waiting. "You are part of the Hollow now," the figure hissed, its voice twisting with satisfaction. "And once you are bound, there is no release, no escape." Lily's mind raced. She had to break free. There had to be a way out of this nightmare. Her gaze flicked to the stone pit in the corner, where the fire flickered weakly. She didn't know why, but something in the flame seemed important. It called to her. She could feel the pull, but the figure noticed. It turned toward the fire, and then back at Lily, its twisted smile widening. "You think you can escape? The Hollow has already claimed you." It stepped closer, the darkness around it swirling, pressing in on her. "There is no escape from what is already inside you." Lily's heart skipped a beat. Inside her, the figure reached out, and with a slow, deliberate motion, it lifted its hand to her face. The touch was cold, like the breath of a grave. The air thickened, and the walls seemed to pulse around her. She gasped as something shifted inside her, a sudden, violent pull, like a string being tugged from the very center of her chest. The Hollow, it wasn't just a place. It wasn't just some dark curse. It was inside her. It had always been inside her. The figure laughed, a hollow, echoing sound that seemed to fill the room. The very stones shook with the force of it. The hollow is not a place, Lily, it crooned. It is a hunger, a thirst that cannot be sated. And it has found you. Lily's eyes went wide as she finally understood. The mansion, the town, her grandmother, it was all a trap. The hollow wasn't just some ancient curse tied to the land. It was a force, a dark, ancient entity that had lived, fed, and grown in the shadows for centuries. And now it had found its vessel, her. The figure leaned closer, its face inches from hers. It whispered one final sentence, each word cold and piercing. "You are the hollow now." Lily screamed, her body convulsing with a rush of pain, as if something were trying to tear itself free from within her. The sensation was unbearable, like her bones were breaking, her flesh splitting open. And then, the world went black. Sometime later, when Lily awoke, she was no longer bound to the stone chair. She was lying on the cold, cracked floor of the cavernous room, her body drenched in sweat. Her breathing was shallow, ragged, as though she had just run a marathon. For a moment, she thought it had been a nightmare, that it was all in her head. But when she opened her eyes, she saw the shadows, thick and swirling, moving in unnatural patterns along the walls. The fire was gone, leaving only cold, barren stone. And standing before her was the figure once again, its eyes hollow, its grin even wider, as if it were savoring some victory. Lily slowly pushed herself up, her limbs weak, but the strength inside her was returning, like a fire igniting in her chest. The figure stepped back, eyes narrowing in sudden suspicion. "You're not afraid?" it asked, its voice a low rasp. Lily stood. Her entire body felt wrong, like a piece of her soul had been ripped away, but something dark, was growing inside her, a force she couldn't deny. She felt the power of the hollow surge through her, a burning presence that was both alien and familiar. Her fingers twitched, and the shadows seemed to stretch toward her, eager, hungry. "I am the hollow," she said, her voice steady, but her eyes were different now, darker, colder. The figure recoiled, its grin faltering, eyes widening with realization. "No," it whispered. You cannot be." Lily took a step forward, and as she did, the shadows in the room thickened, coiling around her like a cloak, wrapping her in their suffocating embrace. The walls groaned, and the very ground beneath her feet seemed to crack and shift. She could feel the pull of the darkness, could feel the hollow's hunger rising, ready to devour everything in its path. Her heart pulsed with the rhythm of the house, the land, the hollow. It was no longer just inside her. It was her. And now, she was in control. She turned to face the figure, her voice a low, dangerous whisper. "You were wrong." And in that moment, the shadows consumed it whole. The fog had settled thick over the village of Ravensbrook, curling around the crooked houses and snaking its way through the narrow, cobbled streets. It was the kind of fog that pressed against your skin and got in your lungs, damp and oppressive. It made the world feel smaller, more suffocating. The kind of fog that never fully lifted, no matter how hard the sun tried to break through. Elliot Markham had only just moved to Ravensbrook. His aunt's passing had left him the old, creaky cottage at the far end of Old Hallows Lane. He didn't know why she had left it to him. He hadn't seen her in years, not since he was a child. There had been whispers about the house, about the lane it sat on. People in the village rarely mentioned it directly, but Elliot had heard the rumors. There were stories, old ones, about the lane's name. Old Hallows Lane. Some said it had been named for the way the trees grew there, black and gnarled, as if they were reaching toward you with skeletal hands. Others said the name came from the lantern that appeared every night on the lane, guiding lost travelers, or perhaps leading them to their doom. Elliot hadn't paid any of it much mind. He didn't believe in ghost stories or superstitions. He was a man of logic, a skeptic by nature. That was probably why he hadn't thought twice about the eerie legends that surrounded Old Hallows Lane when he inherited the cottage. He was determined to make the best of it, perhaps even turn the house into something he could use, a retreat from the hustle and bustle of his work life. But something in the village unnerved him. It wasn't just the fog, though that certainly made the place seem haunted. It wasn't even the strange looks the villagers gave him when he passed them on the street. It was something more elusive, something he couldn't quite put his finger on. The air felt wrong here, heavy, like it was saturated with an ancient, buried memory. And then there was the lantern. Elliot had seen it on his first night in the house, just as the last slivers of twilight bled into darkness. From the window of his new bedroom, he had watched the mist roll in, and far down the lane, where the trees began to grow thick and tangled, there it was, a faint light, swinging gently from side to side. A lantern, flickering like a will-o'-the-wisp. He'd turned away, convinced it was nothing more than a trick of the mist, a street lamp reflecting off the fog. But over the next few nights, he saw it again, always at the same time. Just as the clock struck midnight, the lantern would appear, casting an eerie glow in the distance, swaying as though being carried by someone invisible. The first time, Elliot had dismissed it as imagination, but as the days passed, the feeling grew stronger. One evening, as the lantern's glow flickered into view, Elliot decided to investigate. He couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more to this strange occurrence. With a quiet breath, he pulled on his jacket, grabbed a flashlight, and stepped outside, feeling the chill air rush over his skin. The fog pressed in around him immediately, a thick blanket that seemed to swallow every sound. His footsteps echoed against the cobblestones as he made his way toward Old Hallows Lane. The village behind him seemed distant, muted by the fog, and the street ahead was barely visible, the trees stretching like dark, jagged fingers reaching for the sky. As he walked, the lantern appeared again, just ahead, swaying between the twisted trees. It moved slowly, methodically, as though it were waiting for him. The closer he got, the more the chill of the night seemed to sink into his bones. Finally, he reached the edge of the lane. The lantern was about 50 yards ahead, hanging motionless between two tall, rotting oaks. It was strange, its flickering light casting long shadows across the ground, but there was no one around. No footsteps, no movement, just the cold, the trees, and the lantern gently swinging in the fog. Elliot stepped forward cautiously, his flashlight shaking in his hand. His breath clouded in the air, and he felt an inexplicable sense of unease coil in his stomach. Something about the lantern felt wrong. It wasn't just an object. It was like an invitation. Suddenly, the ground beneath his feet shifted. He stumbled, almost falling, but managed to catch himself. It felt as if the lane itself had shifted. The earth beneath the cobblestones seemed softer, as if it were giving way to something beneath. With a quick glance, Elliot saw something out of the corner of his eye, a shadow darting between the trees. He whipped his head to look, but there was nothing there, just the fog, the trees, and the lantern. But then a voice, low, raspy, like a whisper carried by the wind, sounded from the darkness. "Don't follow it." Elliot froze. His breath caught in his throat. The voice hadn't come from the lantern. It had come from somewhere deeper within the lane, from the darkness itself. He scanned the trees again, his heart racing. He was alone, wasn't he? "Don't follow it," the voice repeated, but this time it was louder, closer. "Turn back. It's too late." His pulse quickened. Who was speaking to him? Was it someone from the village? Someone who knew more about the lantern? Before he could think any further, the lantern in front of him flickered, then went out entirely. The light disappeared, leaving only darkness. The fog thickened in an instant, and the temperature dropped sharply. He shivered, feeling a surge of panic. But then, from the shadows ahead, came the sound of footsteps. Slow, dragging steps. Elliot's blood ran cold. He hadn't heard anyone approach. There was no one in sight. And then, from the depths of the fog, something emerged, a figure, indistinct, barely visible through the mist. It was tall, its body shrouded in a tattered cloak. Its head was down, but it moved with unnatural ease, its gait smooth despite the uneven ground. Elliot tried to speak, to ask who they were, but his throat was dry. His heart hammered in his chest as the figure moved closer, its steps measured, purposeful. "You shouldn't have come," the figure whispered, its voice like the rustling of dry leaves. The lantern calls to those who are lost. It guides them, but no one ever returns. Elliot's mind raced. He needed to run, but his legs felt heavy, as if they were rooted to the ground. His eyes fixed on the figure, and though he could barely make out its face, there was something familiar about it. A hollow, empty feeling settled deep in his stomach. "Who are you?" he managed to croak. The figure lifted its head slowly, and Elliot's breath caught in his throat. The face that stared back at him was empty, a pale, hollowed-out visage, like the skull of some long-dead thing. Its eyes were two dark pits, bottomless and suffocating, and in them, Elliot saw the reflection of something, someone he recognized. It was his own face, staring back at him, hollow and empty. The figure stepped closer, and with every step, the air grew colder. The mist seemed to pull back, revealing an old stone archway that hadn't been there moments before. It was carved with symbols, ancient and worn by time. The archway glowed, faintly, like an open door to something beyond. "The lantern is the key," the figure whispered again. "Follow it, and you will find what you're looking for. But be warned, what you find might not be what you wanted." The figure raised its hand, and in its palm, Elliot saw the faint outline of the lantern, glowing with a dim, sickly light. He could feel its pull now, the force urging him forward, toward the archway. "You cannot escape," the figure said softly. "Not once you've seen it. Once you've walked the lane, you belong to it." Suddenly, the figure moved back into the fog, disappearing as quickly as it had appeared. Elliot stood frozen, the air heavy with the weight of its words. Then, as if in a dream, the lantern flickered to life again, swinging gently in the distance. The faintest whisper carried on the wind. "Follow me." Elliot felt his legs moving before he could stop them. The lantern called to him, a beacon in the thickening fog. He didn't want to follow it. He knew he shouldn't, but the pull was irresistible, the curiosity consuming him. With each step, the fog seemed to grow thicker, the shadows darker. The world around him faded, until all that remained was the lantern, casting its pale light on a path that led deeper into the mist, and into the unknown. The house on Narrow Lane didn't look haunted. That was the first lie it told. It was a narrow, three-story Victorian with fresh white paint and black shutters. The kind of place realtors photograph at golden hour so the shadows fall just right. The for sale sign had been up for 9 months, then 6, then 3, until one October morning it simply vanished, and the house sat empty again, waiting. People driving past never noticed the way the upstairs curtains sometimes shifted when there was no wind, or how the porch light flickered in a rhythm that almost sounded like breathing. Elliot Graves noticed. He noticed everything. He was 31, newly divorced, and in possession of an inheritance large enough to let him ignore rent forever if he was careful. Careful was Elliot's religion. He researched the house for 6 weeks. Tax records, newspaper archives, message boards where locals gossiped about bad energy and something that happened in the 80s. He found nothing concrete, only whispers. Whispers were cheap. He made an offer the same day the asking price dropped for the 3rd time. The realtor, a nervous woman named Karen who kept touching her throat, handed him the keys with trembling fingers. "You'll want to change the locks," she said. "Why?" She only smiled the way people do when they've decided silence is safer. The first night, Elliot walked every room with a flashlight and a notebook, cataloging what needed fixing. The basement door stuck. The attic pull cord was frayed. There was a faint smell, like wet pennies, in the second-floor hallway. He wrote it all down. He slept fine. On the second night, he woke at 3:12 a.m. certain he was not alone in the bedroom. The air felt thick, crowded. He turned on the lamp. Nothing. Just the slow sway of the lace curtains and the sense that something had stepped out of sight the instant light touched it. He laughed at himself, drank water, went back to bed. By the end of the first week, he had a routine. Coffee, work. He restored old photographs for a living, coaxing the dead back into focus. More coffee. Long walks through the overgrown garden where roses grew black and heavy as bruises. He liked the house. It was quiet the way libraries are quiet, as if it were listening. Then the photographs started changing. It was subtle at first. He'd scan a sepia portrait of some long-dead family, clean up the scratches, save the file, and when he opened it again hours later the expressions had shifted. A woman's smile flattened. A child's eyes followed the cursor. Elliot blamed monitor calibration, then tired eyes, then both. He started keeping before and afters. The changes were real. One Thursday, he left a test image open overnight. A little girl in a pinafore, 1893 written on the back in spidery ink. In the morning, her face was gone. Not blurred, not scratched out. Gone, as if the paper itself had swallowed it. Where her features should have been was only smooth photographic emulsion, glossy and wet-looking. In the empty space, something pale reflected the glow of his screen. Elliot slammed the laptop shut so hard the hinge cracked. That night, he couldn't sleep. The house creaked the way old houses do, but the creaks had rhythm now. A slow footfall climbing stairs that weren't there. He sat up in bed with every light burning and listened to something drag itself across the attic floorboards directly above him. Back and forth, patient as a shark. He lasted until dawn. Then he called a priest, a medium, and an electrician in that order. None returned his messages. On the 14th night, the power went out. Not flickered. Went out with a sound like someone pulling a massive plug. The darkness that followed was absolute. Elliot fumbled for his phone and found the battery dead, though it had been fully charged an hour earlier. He sat very still on the edge of the bed and realized he could hear breathing that wasn't his own. It was coming from inside the walls, wet and slow. He forced himself downstairs, trailing his hand along the banister because he dared not let go. In the living room, he found a candle and matches he didn't remember owning. The flame leapt high, too high, throwing shadows that stretched like taffy. In the orange light, he saw footprints on the hardwood, small bare feet, black with something tarry, leading from the fireplace to the front door and back again, over and over, as if whatever made them had been pacing for years waiting for someone to notice. Elliot followed the prints to the basement door. It stood open for the first time since he'd moved in. The smell of wet pennies rolled up the stairs in a wave. He should have left then. Instead, he took the candle and descended. The basement was unfinished, stone walls sweating in the cold. At the far end, beneath a single bare bulb that somehow still worked, sat a child's rocking horse. Its painted smile had flaked away until it looked like a scream. On the floor in front of it lay a pile of photographs, hundreds of them, faces meticulously scratched out with something sharp. Elliot's own face stared up from the top of the pile. The picture had been taken that morning through the kitchen window while he made coffee. His eyes were already gone, two raw white blanks. Behind him, the basement door closed without a sound. The candle snuffed itself. In the dark, something small began to rock the horse. The runners squealed against stone, squealed, a sound like bones dragged over concrete. Elliot backed away until the wall met his shoulders. The rocking grew faster. He felt tiny fingers brush his wrist, cold, sticky, curious. Then another hand, and another, dozens, all reaching, all searching for the places where his face would be. He screamed. The sound came back at him from every direction, multiplied, as though the house were screaming with him and had been waiting a very long time to match his pitch. When morning came, the basement door was open again. Sunlight fell down the stairs in a perfect rectangle, bright and innocent. The rocking horse was gone. The photographs were gone. Only a single bare footprint remained in the dust, pointing toward the stairs like an invitation. Elliot did not leave the house that day, or the next. The for sale sign never went back up. Sometimes, late at night, people driving past Merrow Lane notice all the lights burning on the second floor. They see a man standing at the window, motionless, staring down at the street. If they look closely, they can see he has no face, just smooth skin where features should be, pale and glistening. He raises one hand in a slow wave, the way a child might wave to a parent coming home. Drivers always speed up after that, and they never take Merrow Lane again. Inside the house, the rocking continues, patient, endless, waiting for the next careful man who believes whispers are cheap.